Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture on public service broadcasting and the question of autonomy in India. This lecture is a part of your paper on news and society. About the module, this module sketches out the historical trajectory of political thinking and practice on the question of autonomy of Doordarshan and All India Radio from the post-independence period to now. The question of autonomy is important to consider as it bears heavily on content, particularly news. In a climate of heavily commodified and partisan private media, one needs to interrogate whether the public service broadcaster emerge as a truly public alternative. State monopoly on broadcasting. Early decades, the history of broadcasting in India begins with radio. Within the colonial period, radio was started by a private company, the Indian Broadcasting Company, in 1927. However, due to low returns, the company soon closed down in 1930. The British realized that radio is too powerful an instrument to be left to private players and therefore took it under state control. In 1937, it was named All India Radio AIR. Post-independence, the centralized bureaucratic control over radio not only continued but in fact expanded. The colonial regulatory structures governing broadcasting were also retained, and some of them do so till today. Far from having any editorial freedom, AIR almost functioned like a government department delivering information on state schemes and other related issues. Tight controls also existed on news content. In fact, AIR News Division staff were part of government's Central Information Service. It was also used to promote Hindi as a natural language through the broadcast of national service alongside local services. Within the Nehruvian era, the role of mass media was essentially seen in promoting development and in nation building. Education rather than entertainment was the priority. AIR was thus meant to improve the masses by giving them not what they sought to hear, but what they ought to hear. It was only due to declining listenership that in 1957 a new station devoted to light music and even film music was started. As such, in the early decades, radio was preferred over television, as the latter was considered a luxury that few could afford. This intent, coupled with lack of funds to establish television infrastructure, meant that this medium saw a very slow growth. Television in India was launched in 1959 on an experimental basis in 2 stations. Regular daily transmission began in 1965 and a station was added in Bombay 1972. Through these years, the station were managed by AIR. It was during the emergency that TV was separated from AIR, named Doordarshan DD, on April 1, 1976. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi understood its potential power for offense and defense. Consequently, during the emergency, both radio and TV were used as propaganda machinery. The way that AIR was used promoted many to term it as All Indra Radio. New TV stations were also added in Calcutta, Lucknow and Madras. An often quoted incident of the period is how the Delhi station was ordered to telecast a blockbuster film of the time, Bobby, so as to dissuade people from attending a massive rally led by opposition leader Jayaprakash Narayan. However, the rally drew thousands of people. Early debates on autonomy. Was there any challenge to this tight control on airwaves in the early decades? Yes, on many occasions, the question of autonomy in broadcasting was raised in the political sphere. During the early decades, a few independent commissions recommended for both financial and administrative autonomy of radio and TV. Ironically, it was Indira Gandhi who set up a commission of inquiry into broadcasting in 1964 when she became the Minister of Information and Broadcasting. The commission was headed by A.K. Chanda and brought out a critical report in 1966. It was noted that ministers interfered excessively in the policy-making functions of the Directorate General as well as in programming. In this context, it called for a complete restructuring as also expansion of radio and television. Among their 219 recommendations, which included introduction of advertising in AIR, allocation of higher financial resources, decentralization and mix of development and commercial programs, an important one was the creation of an autonomous national corporation to oversee broadcasting. It was also argued that these powerful media should remain under public control and not be allowed in private hands. The proposal on autonomy was not accepted as Indira Gandhi soon became the Prime Minister. As stated earlier, she realized the importance of keeping broadcasting under state control. In fact, during the emergency period, controls were tightened even on private press. In 1977, when Congress government lost power and the first non-Congress government, the Janata Dal, came in to renew the call for autonomy. In this regard, they commissioned a white paper on the misuse of mass media, followed by the constitution of a working group headed by former newspaper editor B.G. Verghese in August 1977. Here are the following recommendations of the Chanda Committee. The working group also proposed the formation of an autonomous national trust on the lines of the British Broadcasting Corporation (BBC), which would govern radio and television and remove it from government control. They named the trust Akash Bharti and stated that it would be a non-profit body, nationally owned and responsible to Parliament. It would comprise a board of trustees or Nyasi Mandal. The group emphasized on principles of decentralization and opposed the idea of commercial advertising. In 1979, a bill to create an autonomous corporation was introduced in the parliament. However, soon the Janata government fell, and as Indira Gandhi came back in power, the bill was shelved. In early 1980s, television saw an expansion when India decided to host the Asiad Games in 1982. New terrestrial transmitters were added, which increased the coverage of both DD and AIR to almost 80% of the urban population and half of the rural population. Color transmission also began. In December 1982, a working group was appointed to prepare a software plan for Doordarshan under P.C. Joshi so that it could help in promoting social and economic development and provide information, education, and entertainment. Their report, An Indian Personality for Television, gave a number of suggestions in this regard and stressed on the need for a participatory model of communication. Despite the expansion of TV, the question of autonomy was kept in cold storage through 1980s. It was only in 1989 when another non-Congress government came to power that the matter was opened for consideration. A bill was again introduced and finally passed by the Parliament in 1990. However, it was notified only 7 years later in 1997 as Prasar Bharati Broadcasting Corporation of India Act 1990. It established Prasar Bharati as a statutory autonomous body to oversee both AIR and Doordarshan. While the act was based on the Verghese Committee report of 1978, but there were many differences with the recommendations. An important one was that while the committee had called for the creation of a trust in the service of the public, the Act outlined a corporation, Prasar Bharati, a public service broadcaster. It is now 3 decades since promulgation of the Act. However, media scholars and observers are still questioning whether the public service broadcaster established by virtue of it is truly public. This question forms the scope of discussion in this section. At the outset, there is need to consider a landmark pronouncement by the Supreme Court in 1995 in the case of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting versus Cricket Association of Bengal, which was in relation to a contest between Doordarshan and a private broadcaster, TWI, over telecast rights on cricket. Ruling in favor of TWI, the court stated, airwaves constitute public property and must be utilized for advancing public good. It is the duty of the state to see that airwaves are so utilized as to advance the free speech rights of the citizens, which is served by ensuring plurality and diversity of views, opinions, and ideas. Conceding such a right would be detrimental to the free speech rights of the body of citizens, in as much as only the privileged few powerful economic, commercial, and political interests would come to dominate the media. By manipulating the news, views and information, by indulging in misinformation and disinformation to suit their commercial or other interest, they would be harming and not serving the principle of plurality and diversity of views, news, ideas and opinion. The judgment has mainly been interrupted to have called for an independent authority to regulate all broadcasting activities, including of private players and of Prasar Bharati. An independent regulator was also recommended a year later by Nitesh Sen Gupta Committee on Prasar Bharati. But in this pronouncement, the judgment also outlined what constitutes public broadcasting, that which is free from either the controls of the state or commercial pressures. The judgment pointed to the dangers of the privileged few powerful economic, commercial and political interests dominating media. In India, it is the public service broadcaster which has the potential to emerge as a truly public alternative to profit-oriented private media in India. A number of scholars working on media emphasize that strong public service broadcasting forms the cornerstone of public interest in any society, among other provisions such as universality of access, free and pluralistic media, independent regularity, authority, community, media, etc. According to 1993, public service broadcasting itself is based on three axes: access to all, diverse quality programming, free from state, commercial and sectoral interest. Talking of the Indian context, he stresses that the freeing of broadcasting from state control should not be based on or guided by the dictates of economic liberalization, which is currently being seen as the key determinant to the overall development of India. It would be important that the ethic of public service and responsibility to the community be central to the concerns animating the formation of PSB in India. If, on the other hand, such imperatives are treated as peripheral concerns to the debate on the future of broadcasting in India, the further marginalization of the poor in India will become inevitable. In short, the public service broadcasting has to meet the needs of two Indias if it is to distinguish itself from private and foreign competitors and remain relevant in a crowded multi-channel market. In this backdrop, the answer to whether public service broadcaster Prasar Bharati is truly public can be gauged by reviewing whether it meets the normative conditions of being free of the controls of state, excessive commercial pressures, and whether it serves public interest in its programming. We examine this question here. In principle, the autonomous status of Prasar Bharati has been guaranteed by having only one representative of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, MIB, in the 13-member board for its supervision and management. But as scholars note, Both existing loopholes in the Act and the actual implementation pose a question mark on its autonomous status. For instance, there is a bifurcation within Section 32 of the Act which mandates that the government shall make the rules and Prasar Bharati shall make the regulations. According to Mrinal Pandey, a former chairperson of the board, the Act was hastily crafted and gave birth to a malnourished creature with a severe bipolar disorder, as a result of which, over the past 17 years, an almost stylistic system has continued to run it from the back seat. As Chapter 4 guarantees that the authority for practically everything from fixing the salaries and allowances and laying down conditions of service, including retirement benefits, for 3 whole-time members of the board, that is, the CEO and the member of personnel and finance, 6 part-time members including the chairman, and all the employees of AIR and DD remains with the ministry. So, there is no transparency in how a chairperson or other board members are selected and how a Prasar Bharati board asked with general supervision, direction and management of the affairs of corporation can have no say in the selection of the 3 top members of the executive, the CEO and the member personnel and finance. What has been commonly observed is that all political parties talk of guaranteeing genuine autonomy to the corporation when in opposition, but gladly muddle with its affairs when in power. P.G. Verghese, and also former director of the Prasar Bharati, says PSB never enjoyed autonomy with accountability to the people of India through Parliament as statutorily provided. The government has kept it on a tight leash, controlling personnel and finance. The PB board, the custodian of its autonomy, was reduced to a little more than a signboard without a chairman or a full complement of members. The administrative autonomy is in many ways linked to financial autonomy. Prasar Bharati is dependent for at least half of its budget on government funding, which comes in the form of equity, grant in aid or loans. Special budgetary allocations are also made. This dependence makes it vulnerable to political interference in management, as also as we shall see later in matter of news content. In 1999, a review committee was appointed by the Bharatiya Janata Party (BJP) led National Democratic Alliance (NDA) government. Headed by Shunu Sen, the committee noted, public service broadcasting is essential in India and must be seen as a right of all the citizens. It must provide a platform for free discourse and debate, while its content must empower people. The role and functions of a public service broadcaster require that must it be autonomous. While Prasar Bharati should be accountable to Parliament for policy and strategic decisions, The organization would be responsible for its own operational and tactical decisions. The government of the day must have no hand in its functioning or decision making and must remain at arm's length from Prasar Bharati. On similar lines, a committee appointed by the Congress Party-led United Progressive Alliance (UPA) government in 2013 and headed by Sam Pitroda stressed that all the sections and clauses in the Act which allow the government to decide on matters of appointment, payment, service rules, finances, etc. should be scrapped. It also called for structural changes in all its systems, including ownership, management and finance. It stated Prasar Bharati's vision must be to become a genuine public broadcaster as against a government broadcaster or a commercially motivated private broadcaster. It should be perceived as an unbiased, credible, autonomous, independent voice that makes India's better citizen and enriches their lives with right information, quality, entertainment and value education. Also that real autonomy flows from financial independence. Budgetary flow should be like charged funds as flow to constitutional bodies. Government must allocate resources and then follow a totally hands-off policy. But as before, these suggestions on autonomy have not been implemented by either government. It continues to function like a state-controlled commercial enterprise. And even though digitization has helped expand the broadcaster's reach, but it has not necessarily improved the diversity and quality of its input. News, one of the most important barometers of media autonomy, is the quality of its news broadcasts. As has been noted before, the liberalization of media in India, news broadcasts were only available on state-controlled DD and AIR and were almost the official version of events. It was hoped that after 1997, the public broadcaster would be freer, but lack of genuine autonomy has meant news is still under government control. The Pitroda Committee also observed the autonomy of the public service broadcaster depends upon how the news is perceived by the people at large, but news and current affairs programs are planned, edited and managed by the officers belonging to 16 Indian Information Service, over which Prasar Bharati has absolutely no control. Their deployment in Prasar Bharati along with specific place of posting is tightly controlled by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which also retains the right of calling them back. Recent past has enough instances to testify to this control. For instance, it was reported that during the run-up to the 2014 Lok Sabha elections, the UPA government via MIB used DD and AIR to publicize government's development programs. This was done through direct advertising spots, advertorials, audiovisual dramas and serials, and success stories and discussion-based programs on the government schemes and programs. DD News also aired explanatory packages giving details of various government schemes, duly peppered with interviews of related union ministers. The then CEO of Prasar Bharati, Jawahar Sircar, complained about the lack of operational autonomy in DD's operations. He later resigned a few months before his term was to end officially, though this was done when government changed hands. As can be seen, the government are using the media much like their predecessors, that is, as a publicity and propaganda tool. One clear instance is the monthly promotional program Man Ki Baat, a chat with our PM, which is simultaneously telecast live on DD National, DD News, all AIR channels, on MW, SW, FM, AIR website, mobile app and YouTube channels, as also on pmonradio.nic.in, mygovernment.in and the Narendra Modi app. In May 2015, on the completion of BJP's 1 year in office, Prasar Bharati sent a written order to AIR demanding that it publicize government success stories in all languages. A detailed schedule of various programs to be covered by AIR's regional news units was also sent. As concerns about the commodification and distortion of news in private TV channels continue to intensify the need for a strong and independent public broadcasting becomes even more urgent. However, given the existing government controls on the broadcaster, especially in news, this seems like a distant dream. No government wants to give this control. This is visible also the fact that private FM channels are still not allowed to air their own news. They only play AIR news capsules every hour. Given that FM channels are largely owned by the same media companies which run private TV news channels, the cut is rather contradictory. But as Sinha 1996 and McDowell 1997 argue, the opening up of television in 1990s was a necessity, as it was a barometer and showcase of state commitment, neoliberal economic reforms. But in whichever realms possible, leash will be tightened. In the FM case, the government fears that given the wide reach, it would not be able to monitor and control news broadcasts, especially in remote areas. This order has been challenged many times. In response to a petition on this matter, the Supreme Court recently stated that the orders which prohibit private FM radio stations and community radio stations from broadcasting their own news and current affairs program are clearly violative of fundamental rights of speech and expression as guaranteed under Article 19(1) of the Constitution. But as has been seen, freedom is perhaps the last thing that government want in the media. Summary. One of the most important conditions of free press in any democratic setup is absence of state control. When India gained independence, freedom of speech, from which freedom of press derives its sanctity, was enshrined in the constitution of a democratic India. However, a contradiction emerged in practice. While print media enjoyed unfettered growth, radio and television were kept strictly under the monopoly of the state. While the opening up of the media in the early 1990s, private television and radio channels flourished, but Doordarshan and AIR continued to be within state control. The various attempts to guarantee autonomy to these media delivered only in 1997 with the promulgation of the Prasar Bharati Act. However, as the module discussed, political control of the board continues, bringing into question its autonomous status. Political control especially exists in news on both DD and AIR. They continue to exist as publicity media for which regime is in power, squashing any hopes of them emerging as truly public alternative to profit-driven private players. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the module carefully and attempt the question at the end. Thank you.